just need to hook this up to my laptop and use my hacking skills to root around with the binary 9 bypass, and I'm in.
Ah, sweet Satan, me head!
Yeah, sorry about that, Anduwz. I'm downloading the entire Star Trek wiki into your head. I kind of need you to be able to tell me stuff that I don't personally know.
I was better off as a bloody Cyberman!
And that should be good.
You can't!
How's that? You a Trekkie yet?
You bastard! 20% of me brain is perma-virgins arguing over who is the better out of Picard and Kirk in fucking Klingon.
Yeah, probably shouldn't have included the forums. They're not exactly pertinent. Sorry about that.
Please, throw me in the bloody toilet.
Maybe later if you're good.
Your theft of cyber technology has been discovered. You will surrender the head immediately and surrender for deletion.
Deletion, not conversion. How the hell's that fair?
Your brain is diseased. We do not require it.
Ha! Even they think you're a prick.
Right. Fuck off, the pair of you. I'm gonna do some dimensional hopping to get onto Stu's channel. Wait for this to blow over.
Wait. Aren't you just stealing the plot from Escape from Reality?
And away we go!
Twist?
Oh good, we didn't become spaghetti, that's good.
That was an option. You could have
Actually, hold that thought. We're on a monetized channel. So, nanny filter. You were saying?
You could have flippin' said.
Oh good, it works. Now, let's talk about the Who Trek crossover comic, Assimilation².
Star Trek and Doctor Who are very much both sci-fi, so it's not a surprise to anyone that they crossed over at some point, and I doubt anyone would complain. Well, there's usually a turd who does complain, but honestly, screw them, I'm glad they're sad. Both of these series do have a fair bit in common, being established in the 60s, only 3 years apart, and both were major contributors to the genre, especially within their respective countries. It's a little like how Turkish Star Wars was Turkey's major contributor for science fiction, for instance. In 2012, just after the 5th season of the revived series, a comic book was commissioned in which Matt Smith's 11th Doctor crossed over with the Enterprise crew for an outing, in which they joined forces against 2 of their deadliest foes. The Cybermen have leapt from the Whoniverse to make friends with the Borg, and I think we can all agree that that is a wonderful and beautiful moment of friendship, overcoming the walls of reality themselves. Well, it would be a beautiful thing, but now they've fused into a race of Cyberborg.
Cyber? What?
A robot?
Some sort of cyborg, if you will. What a novel concept. The story opens up with the Doctor, Amy and Rory sorting out some stuff in ancient Egypt. I'm sort of gonna gloss over this part because it doesn't really have much to do with the setup, the Cybermen, Star Trek or anything really. It's really just an opener. However, I will point out that the ancient Egypt monster is apparently linked to Prisoner Zero from the 11th Hour, which was the first episode that Amy and her boys appeared in. This ends with them getting an inkling that the Cyber Boys are up to something. The Doctor goes to 1930s Chicago where he notices a slight oddity. An android is chilling at the back of the bar that they walk into.
A minor character of little importance, I'm sure.
Issue 2 shows what the Enterprise were doing this whole time. It begins with Data talking about upgrades and the potential to replace his parts. He explains that he decided not to a long time ago due to the nature of the paradox known as Theseus' ship. How many parts can you remove and swap before you can no longer call it the same machine? This is a paradox that Doctor Who later went on to touch in the episode Deep Breath.
You are a broom. Question. You take a broom, you replace the handle. And then later, you replace the brush. And you do that over and over again. Is it still the same broom? Answer, no, of course it isn't, but you can still sweep the floor, which is not strictly relevant. Skip that last part. You have replaced every piece of yourself, mechanical and organic, time and time again. There's not a trace of the original you left. You probably can't even remember where you got that face from.
Stoodogg has also brought this up previously as a concept in his review of the first Borg episode.
This Borg ship being something that grew over time, replaced its parts like a ship of Theseus, or for the British amongst you, like Trigger's broom.
I've maintained it for 20 years. This old broom has had 17 new heads and 14 new handles in its time.
Adding technology to itself, part car boot sale, part museum, part junkyard. They simply loot what they want or need and leave, treating their bodies in the same way, replacing organic parts with mechanical ones as they wear out.
However, I myself find this to be a cool concept to talk about in relation to this story. Partly because it shows a sentimental side to Data, making him a bit more human, but there's actually a cool connection that this concept brings to the Cybermen themselves. In their original conception in the 10th Planet, way back in the mid-60s, they were actually devised by two scientists who wrote for Doctor Who, a husband and wife. The concept of the Cyberman was birthed from these two, merely waxing scientific philosophy in their back garden on a summer's day whilst drinking tea. Because they're British, you know. Basically, as scientists, they took an interest in the concept of the cyborg, which at this point was starting to be explored and visualised in the media. I believe it was the concept of the iron lung that was one of the main reasons that these two scientists began the trail of thought that led to this question. How many parts of a man can you replace with machinery and still call him a man? It's a question that hovers over the Cybermen and Borg as concepts, especially given how people can come back from being assimilated, but the Cyberman upgrade is kinda permanent. I'm not sure if this is a knowing reference. I mean, there are several references like this across the whole of science fiction. Hell, even in stuff like cyberpunk, you have the concept of cyberpsychosis, where a man can literally lose his mind by giving too much of himself up and replacing it with machinery. However, because of this connection, I do very much appreciate it being there. Meanwhile, the Enterprise crew are doing something a little more plot relevant, in which they are investigating this planet ran by fish people. You know, I know a guy who might have been exiled from here actually.
Come on, Craig.
The Federation have been skimping out on health and safety. The fish folk aren't helping much, as they usually just show up, announce that they are fish people, and then leave. Due to the Federation being stretched due to Borg attacks, these boys are having to make do. Unfortunately, things are so dire that the room that they're being toured in actually floods, and Riker almost drowns. I do like that Data saves him by just unceremoniously yanking him out of the water, and he just calmly looks around like, yeah, he's in here somewhere.
In the event of a water landing, I have been designed to serve as a flotation device.
Group of medics are sent to assist in cataloguing the 22 dead red shirts who drowned down there, but in more important news, there's a new 1930s San Francisco simulation available for the boys to dick around in.
You're true ducking me, Hill! Computer, freeze program!
One detail that I kinda like is that there's a Tom's Bakery sign in the background, which is kinda clever, not gonna lie. And so, this is where we catch up with the latest issue, where the Doctor comes in and introduces himself by tugging at Data's face, admiring his craftsmanship. I like how Amy just points out that he's being rude. So the Doctor accidentally gets pulled into a simulated version of San Francisco, pulled in by proxy, I'm guessing. My impression is that he gets himself pulled in here on purpose after seeing the Cybermen and the Gem, and pretends to be taken by surprise so he wouldn't immediately get kicked out of the simulation. But admittedly, that's just purely me second guessing it. So Riker ends the program trying to basically end them, but in the process he finds that they are actually physically in the room with him. They bring the Doctor to Worf, who the Doctor is able to identify as a Klingon, despite the fact that he'd never heard the word before, and this bothers him. They get brought to Picard, who quickly pulls up his pants. I don't want to know.
Yeah, you do. Don't lie.
Come cheer up, lads. Come cheer up, lads.
They hit it off remarkably well, given the Doctor is a stowaway on a Federation ship. Diana tries to get a reading of the Doctor, but that's quite a tall order for someone of his complexity, even for someone of her talents. Whilst this is going on, the Doctor is explaining that he suspects that other things might have slipped from his universe to the Trekverse, and he's somewhat concerned about this. I mean, that bloody Grace frog might have escaped its little pocket dimension and might have moved in here. And then what are we gonna do? That was weird enough when it was in its own dimension. The Delton homeworld is under attack, but it's not of any strategic advantage besides just being very densely populated. Picard kinda blames the Doctor for this, which is a bit... well, it's not completely illogical, but it's a bit of a shit thing to toss at his feet almost immediately after his arrival. I like how the Doctor just sort of babbles his way around the control room, and Worf has to politely ask him to stop talking. They see on the screen what to expect, and this is where the art kind... okay, I can't ignore it anymore, let's talk about the art. So, in the earlier volumes especially, there's a clear case of the art being traced from stills of the respective shows. This can be rather obvious at times. When characters are properly drawn, they either look like vague shapes smudged with coloured grease, or they look like I drew them with their doofy expressions that I personally just find funny. This is one of those things where saying that a character is off-model isn't entirely accurate, because I don't really know what is on model for these artists. A lot of the time the characters do not look the same twice. Yeah, okay, the basic character looks the same twice, but the actual consistency of the quality of how they look is never the same twice. It's not outright terrible, it's not unpleasant to look at most of the time, but it is... I don't know, it does feel like maybe some of these panels could have been looked over once or twice. So, we got this panel where Picard looks horrified at the terrors beyond the known universe, Data looking like he's simultaneously bored and annoyed, and Dr. 11 looking like a lobe sprained in his brain. There's several moments in the comic where characters genuinely look like they're broken, or like those really bad bootleg molds you can get. on shitty knockoff action figures. It's amusing, but I struggle to imagine that the people working on this thing didn't spot some of the more obvious ones before shipping. I could totally get characters looking a bit off model if things weren't focusing on them, or if there was a lot going on panel and they could be overlooked. But when you're at the focal point of the panel, you shouldn't really be this off model. Especially if you're dealing with digital art. I mean, I suck as an artist because of several disabilities, and even I would go back over and do this better if I had produced some of these panels. The next cover for issue 3 depicts the 4th Doctor played by Tom Baker with the original crew members, Kirk and Spock, with Kirk trying to fight the Cybermen and doing a really shit grade job of it. I do really love this as a fun little what if scenario, and I'm sure that this has absolutely nothing to do with the actual story whatsoever. Anyway, the cyborgs pop up and make contact with the Enterprise. The awesome combinations between the Cyboys and the Borgies are definitely what we paid for here. No potential was wasted in these designs, and I love it.
I say buy. Admittedly, you can't really buy this, especially not in a digital capacity at this point, so I might have maybe gone around and tried to find an archive copy of it. There are physical copies of it kicking about on eBay, but a lot of them are very, very overpriced. And admittedly, that isn't as much use to me, trying to, put the panels on screen and talk about them. I mean, I'm good, but, that's just whole other layers of effort that I just really would rather avoid if I can. Literally everything else has a digital release, but because of rights, this doesn't. And they'd rather not make any money off of it than share profits at this point. So it's like, well, screw them.
So basically, you're a cheapskate.
After this, I might try that experiment I've been working on, where I shove as many Lifetime movies into your head as humanly possible until it explodes. Twat.
So this is where the Doctor's expertise come in, since he's dealt with the Cybermen before. I do like the use of the Cybermen in this story. The Cybermen and the Borg have been well picked as they are similar, though there's just enough difference that conflict could be possible, as well as an alliance that would be bad for everyone. It could have gone either way. I could maybe picture a few more combinations working, like the Klingons and the Sontarans, or the Klingons and the Ice Warriors.
Tit Sontarans and Tit Hierarchy might be long-lost relatives. No idea which one's the prettier of the two, though.
Ice Warriors would be an interesting one, as they play a very similar role to the Klingons. In the earlier episodes, they were a hostile race who later became more civilized and became allies with Earth, and the relationship with the Ice Warriors and the main characters very much depend on what era they've travelled to in time. Early Ice Warriors tend to be hostile, whereas late Ice Warriors are very diplomatic and civilized. There's even some episodes where they end up on this sort of precipice point between the two Ice Warriors, where they are savages but could potentially become, civilized. Picard continues to be suspicious of the Doctor as he appeared right before the Cybermen did, though it doesn't seem to be that simple because the Cybermen have clearly been here for some time. The Doctor assures the crew that it's probably for the best that he is here, as his assistance and knowledge of the Cybermen is bound to be invaluable. Picard asks Data to look up the Cybermen and finds a log from the Enterprise, but it's not their Enterprise, it's the one commanded by James T. Kirk.
There have been 5 Federation ships with that name. Please specify by registry number.
NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D.
It is during this moment that the Doctor starts to feel funny and has a flashback as his timeline and thus his memories catch up to him as he recalls being here before. We then cut back to the original Enterprise crew, and I love that the art style changes to something more period accurate. Not only does this distinguish the art and separate the segment from the modern day bits, but it also fits in with the style of the show that it's based on. There's a lot of flat colouring and a lot of primary colours all over the place. It's very well put together. They're greeted by a Jedi looking guy who gives them a tour of the facility. They are instantly suspicious of this. They were ready and waiting to give a tour, and they also seem quite scripted in their responses as well, more or less acting like those animatronics you get on a theme park ride or an Oblivion NPC. So they try some late night breaking and entering, but find themselves stumped by the keypad lock. Thankfully, a guy in a coat and a scarf shows up and offers to help. The fourth Doctor crossing over with the original Enterprise team is really cool, even if I'm torn as to whether or not a Doctor from the 60s like Hartnell or Troughton might have worked really well too, and given that, the shows ran side by side, I kind of would have appreciated that as well, but I'm not going to complain at all that it was Tom Baker picked for this segment. I mean, after all, he is the most iconic version of the character, especially in America. The Doctor uses his sonic screwdriver to unlock the panel and then offers everyone a jelly baby. Spock, being Spock, overanalyzes the
sweet love
out of it. Fascinating. Gelatin confectionery dusted with starch and molded into the shape of a small child. They get deeper into the facility and notice that all of the workers stay overnight, sleeping upright. Someone in the games industry has got a chubby and is taking notes whilst reading this. I know that to be a fact. Whitmore. He's completely catatonic, Jim.
It's worse than that. He's dead, Jim. Dead, Jim. Dead, Jim. It's worse than that. He's dead, Jim. Dead, Jim. Dead.
There's a pretty cool callback to the modern Cyberman stories where these guys have earpieces controlling them. Apparently in this story they can just be removed. Probably because these are older and different Cybermen. You tried pulling them out in the modern era, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of yuck.
What are those earpieces? Don't. But they're standard comms devices. How does it control them?
Trust me, leave them alone.
But what are they? Ugh. Oh, God! It goes inside their brain!
Anyway, they're about to evacuate the pudding heads when these Cyberboys turn up. I do like their designs. I believe they're based on the Cyberman designs from Revenge of the Cybermen, which was a Tom Baker Cyberman story, and they do have the tear duct and open solar panel thing on their chest, which pretty much is all of the matching details to these versions from the comic. Now, for the Enterprise crew, unless it's been like retconned and shit, which Anduwz has assured me that it hasn't, these guys haven't faced anything like the Cybermen before. They haven't encountered the Borg as they were a next generation thing and weren't introduced until the 80s. So this is like a pretty big, oh, bum biscuits moment for them.
The old school boys might have seen an android or two, even some ancient ones, but nothing like the Cybermen or the Borg.
Is all of the matching details to these versions from the comic. Now, for the Enterprise crew, unless it's been like retconned and shit, which Anduwz has assured me that it hasn't, these guys haven't faced anything like the Cybermen before. They haven't encountered the Borg as they were a next generation thing and weren't introduced until the 80s. So this is like a pretty big, oh, bum biscuits moment for them.
In deja vu, you only think you're repeating events. We actually are.
Every time the loop begins again, everything resets itself and starts all over.
You mean we could have come into this room, sat at this table, and had this conversation a dozen times already?
A dozen, 100. It's impossible to tell.
The Cybermen are instantly able to crush Kirk's phaser before he can set it to
fornication.
So the drones escape and everyone shoots the hell out the Cybermen with phasers set to maximum power, which admittedly, I don't know what else you'd use when two mechanical men that keep slaves are marching towards you with murderous intent. Like, what setting were they using before that? Tickle? Captain Kirk obviously attempts to fight the Cyberman leader and recreate his fight with Gorn, but the cyber leader is not having any of those shenanigans and chokes him out before lifting him up and throwing him at a wall. Captain Kirk is climbing the Cyberman. Why is he climbing the Cyberman? He wants to make love to the Cyberman. He wants to envelop that Cyberman. Anyway, Dr. 4 decides to pitch in and ask if Kirk has any gold to chuck at the Cyberman. Kirk does have something that might work, though a badge of mathematical excellence would have done a much better job. After a bit of distraction from Kirk, well, the Doctor is able to defeat the Cyberman with pocket sand. Well, it's more like pocket gold dust, but shut up, you're not my real father. Anyway, Spock gets sick of this, and he decides that it's time to let the grown-ups handle this. And he murders the ever-loving
friendship
out of this Cyberman. Dr. 4, after the Cybermen are all dead, explains that the respiratory system is damaged by the gold, which is news to these guys because I'm pretty sure they thought that they were robots before this point. I like that these guys called the Cybermen Cyber-Men, with the hyphen between cyber and men. It really does build this sort of difference and variation between cataloguing and naming of creatures. I do like this as a detail in any form of fiction where characters kind of name things differently depending on where they are, because it's quite true to life. Anyway, the Doctor leaves whilst they're all congratulating each other, and around the time that they realise that he wasn't with either of them and was seemingly a third unauthorised party. However, not all was good, as this large piece of old tech, despite assurances from Scotty, was altered by the cyber boys, and thus left the door open to more cyber boys showing up. We get back to the present, and Dr. 11 has remembered everything. He explains that this was a past incarnation that assisted, and his memories have finally caught up. By the way, Amy and Rory have not witnessed a regeneration before, and I don't believe they've ever even been told that this is a thing. So they're taking that he used to be a completely different person remarkably well. It's not exactly established when this is in the timeline. It is established that this is after season 1, as Rory does reference the fact that he was a Roman soldier before this point in the story. I'd put this between season 5 and 6, but I'm not entirely sure.
So, that object in Picard's ready room is the Kurlan Niaskos, which was given to Picard in Season 6, Episode 20. This had put this between 2369 and 2371, which was the year that the Enterprise D was destroyed by the Dora sisters. So this Doctor Who comic book takes place somewhere in the late 6th, perhaps early 7th season of TNG. Season 6 ended on a Borg cliffhanger called Descent Part 1, where a splinter faction of Tit Borg were at war with Tit Federation, so everybody would be taking terror dumps in their panties over the Borg at that point. The original series stuff would take place around 2269, about 100 years earlier, because the shuttle is the Galileo 2nd, Galileo number 2, because the first one got destroyed in the accident that took place over a planet called Moriaski 2.
The Cybermen have buggered off for a bit. This gives them the chance to take the Doctor to Guinan so that she can shed some wisdom, or make coffee, or whatever it is she does. I'm not too familiar with her character. Guinan works out that the Doctor is a time traveller very quickly, and that his TARDIS is his means to travel in time. Her knowing this is a shock to the Doctor, as not many people work this out this quickly. It implies that she's very special and very powerful, even among psychics that he's encountered. The two of them deduce that they're experiencing things outside of the flow of time. As a result, they are the only two that know that their worlds should not be colliding. I suppose in the Doctor's universe, Guinan would have been akin to the Dalek time strategist, not a Time Lord, but somehow still time and temporally sensitive.
So Guinan is as old as the Doctor, and she has the sensitivity to changes in the timeline. You're looking for an episode called Yesterday's Enterprise. She's met Picard and Data before, round about 1800s when she was pals with Mark Twain back in the day. Picard and Data accidentally went back in time and Data's head fell off. And then they found it again in San Francisco, and it had been lying there for hundreds of years. I guess she's like the original River Song when you really think about that.
You know, that's actually a really interesting point, Anduwz. That's no problem, it was empty anyway.
There's only one conclusion that they can both draw, and that's that the cyborg collaboration is huge in the worst way possible. It's Armageddon in scale. Bear in mind that the Federation ran away from the Borg the first time that they were encountered, as they had no means of fighting back, and they barely managed that.
On screen.
Warp 9.
On the photon torpedoes. 5.
The Cybermen are such a threat in the Hooniverse that they nearly conquer everything at one point before organic life manages to push back. UNIT, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, have a protocol called Code Silver. Code Silver is the order or protocol that if a single Cyberman is found in a city, in the episode in question, the city is London, everything is to be locked down until one of two things happen. They find and neutralize the Cyberman and accompanying Cybermen or means to make more Cybermen, or else they have no choice but to nuke London off the face of the planet. The Cybermen are such a viral threat that nuking an important city off the face of the planet is a worthwhile price to pay just to eliminate that threat. So these two things coming together is like EA and Activision merging into one company. The Doctor assures them that they can stop this, but rule 1, the Doctor lies. They're interrupted by a call from the bridge. Riker wants them up top. Amy and her boys rush off, and Picard hangs back to have a private word with Guinan. The cyborg fleet has headed for the Earth, but seemingly changed its mind. Sadly, it's not likely the case that the cyber controller wants to stop off at Five Guys. In fact, they're pulling out of planets that they were assimilating, planets that they basically conquered and were just about to deliver the finishing blow to. Picard then seemingly turns into an 85-year-old man, due to him being off model.
No. Oh dear, you're a bit older than I imagined.
They're reluctant to bring a civilian along, referring to the Doctor, which is kind of funny because this dude literally fought in the Time War. He fought in a universe-wide war that lasted thousands of years, maybe even millions or billions. Nobody actually knows for sure. Then we get a panel that looks like it's from a Street of Fear comic. On the planet, they find a lot of dead Borg and a lot of questions. The Doctor steals some Borg and some Cyberman corpses to see if he can get anything useful from them. The Enterprise crew are kinda worried, as I imagine that they do have rules in place like the Quarians do with the Geth, where you can't bring live Borg onto the ship in case they activate. I mean, it's well established in the Doctor Who verse that a Cyberman's severed arm can still come to life on its own. But the Doctor says don't worry about it, so they don't worry about it. Whilst they're looking over the dead Borg and Cyberman, Deanna appears, who is the ship's counselor. She wants to talk to Amy and Rory, prompting Amy to pull the most terrifying facial expression in this entire story. Making fun of the art aside, I actually really like this part as it does really solidify this as a good crossover to me. Characters meet, swap notes, compare and contrast in a way that benefits them both as characters and gives them their own little scenes in the story. Even if they don't further the plot, it's nice to have as many interactions as possible between characters, especially in a setting where they're only likely to ever meet once. If I had to criticize anything, I'd say that a lot of this is like Trek characters inviting the Doctor Who characters to open up, or talking about what they deduce or think about them. The reverse rarely ever happens. Like in this scene, maybe Amy or Rory could have understood Deanna's role on the ship and compared it to their own role with the Doctor. Instead, Deanna just asks some leading questions and they waffle on about themselves. It's by no means bad, but it does kind of give off the vibe that this is a Doctor Who episode taking place in the Trekverse, and I feel an even stronger crossover than this would have given more nuance to both sides of this story. Ideally, in a good crossover, I don't think it should feel like one is visiting the other. It should really feel like they've come together and made their own thing, in my opinion. The boys come to the conclusion that the cyborgs are no more, and that the Cybermen have turned on the Borg and gunned them down. Apparently, the Cyberman ships have also started attacking Borg ships and completely destroying them. Picard and Riker almost revel in the Borg's destruction, and they have quite a lot of justification for doing so. This somewhat worries the Doctor, as they sound quite willing to jump into bed with the Cybermen, or at the very least tolerate their existence in their universe. At this point, they come to the conclusion that they don't have to do much and the Cybermen will destroy the Borg and likely get mostly wiped out themselves in the attempt. They are hailed by the Borg and Picard is put into contact with them. I do kind of like that they feel the need to announce themselves, like, we are the Borg. Like, thanks, I thought you guys were Mormons for a second. The Borg are very insistent on calling Picard Locutus, which is basically his Borg slave name. One thing I like about the Borg in this, and I'm not sure if it's taken from the show or specific to this comic, but the Borg often make gestures that almost feel as if they're really bad gestures of good faith. The first is constantly calling Picard Locutus, whilst many might see this as them calling him his slave name to provoke him, or to put him in his place or put him down, as well as instill memories of the horrors that he endured as their captive. However, to me, this seems more like a really warped idea of respect. That they call him their own name for him, the name that almost led them to victory at one point, to hail him. There's another thing they do later down the line, and I'll point it out when it comes up, but I do kind of like the complexity that comes with the Borg. The idea that they're so far gone past the point of no longer being organic, that organic concepts elude them to the point where they accidentally do these sort of things. Or at least I interpret it that way. I don't know if I'm just completely overthinking it, but it does make sense to me. It kind of reminds me how the Daleks in the early episodes couldn't comprehend what the hell laughter was, and they just shouted, "Stop making that sound," as if they thought it was somebody doing some weird alarm screech sound because they legit couldn't understand what laughter is. And I get that impression from the weird gestures that the Borg make throughout this story. I really like it. We then move on to issue 5, where we begin with a dream I imagine several of you have had a few times. Picard is adamant that the Borg and the Enterprise will never work together no matter what. Which is fair enough, I guess. I mean, they did turn the Enterprise's captain into a soulless husk of a machine and had him attack his own friends. I mean, you've got to draw the line somewhere. Picard is sure that the Cybermen and the Borg will wipe each other out now that they've turned on each other, but the 11th Doctor knows otherwise. The Cybermen are an unrelenting force that almost conquered his entire universe, and whilst Picard's universe is more organised than his own, it actually has less great powers in it than the Doctor's, from what I can tell. I mean, the Doctor's universe has a number of powerful races and organisations that will have stood in the Cybermen's way, and fell. They're definitely up there alongside the Sontarans, Rutans and Daleks as powerful civilizations capable of an impressive scale of destruction, and the Cybermen in the right situation could defeat any of them. At least in the Whoniverse you'd have races like the Daleks and the Sontarans too, at the very least, to slow the Cybermen down. However, here, it could be a completely different kettle of fish. There are entities like Q who might have the ability to stop them, but not much motivation to do so unless their interests align with stopping them.
Maybe they'd get ganged up on by tribbles.
I mean, is there anyone that can actually, stop them at all? I mean, I assume so, but is there anyone that comes to mind?
Well, there's several of the numbered species that could do the job. But would they? It's kind of its own question. Then you got them higher existence guys, like the prophets, the Dowd and the like. But getting that lot to do anything actually useful is like circumcising yourself with a pencil sharpener.
Elegantly put as always, Handles.
Whilst I'm sure someone really into Trek probably could map out a way that they could be defeated just using Trek-verse resources, it would still feel like a bit of a gamble in either universe just to let these guys go unchecked and let them do whatever they want. By the way, I wanted to take this moment to bring up that the Cybermen almost became something closer to the cyborgs in the Doctor Who universe itself. In the 1990s American TV show, which only exists in a heretical text known as the Leakley Bible, the Cybermen were depicted as a new race called the Cybes. I really didn't need to tell you that this was conceived in the 1990s. I could have just said Cybes, and your brain would have just clicked into that decade. They were designed to look more like a group of cyborg or robotic raiders. I get the impression that they were designed to look like several Earth civilizations that raided and just sort of blended them all into one. Civilizations such as the Mongols, the Vikings, Native Americans, but they were quite reminiscent of early depictions of the Borg, where they almost felt like ship part stealing pirates rather than an unstoppable conquering army that some would argue is a sort of allegory for communism and the whole Theseus a ship thing. More than anything, the Cybes really remind me of the robo-pirates from Rayman 2. I am glad that this change wasn't an official implementation, as it would have removed one of the show's most iconic enemies, and whilst the Cybes aren't actually a terrible concept, minus the awful 90s as all hell name, I do think their use would be limiting in comparison, and it would have also been a shame to replace a race of sci-fi villains that are both iconic and actually conceived by scientists from days gone by with, well, something that I feel has already been done, and honestly, I don't know if it would have been done better than any of its predecessors or those that came after it, because not much in the Leakley Bible was especially original or unique or very interesting or brilliant. It sounded like it would be painful to sit through, and I'm glad that none of that shit ever got made. Anyway, because Guinan and the Doctor are both time sensitive, they know something that Picard doesn't: the future. You see, both of these two are time sensitive in one way or another, and the shift in universal power is something that the two of them can't help but notice and feel. It is within their very bones. From Picard's perspective, the Doctor is making a big mistake in wanting to treat the Borg as the lesser of two evils, but the only reason he'd do such a thing is that he knows it's the only path to avoid the death of everyone around him, a bit like Doctor Strange in Avengers Endgame. It's very reminiscent of the episode Doomsday, where the Doctor temporarily sides with the Cybermen to fight the Daleks, as the Daleks just don't work with anyone and are capable of wiping them all out together, never mind in a three-way dance. Not only does Guinan actually serve as a mediator to convince Picard that the Doctor is actually making sense, but she also explains to the Doctor about Picard's history with the Borg, something that the Doctor can kind of relate to, and will relate to even more in Nightmare in Silver. Even though that only affected him for an afternoon, and he only had to play chess against it to beat it, and he technically cheated. You know what, it was close enough of an analogy. It was close enough. I can't promise a perfect analogy every time. She tells the story via a gruesome flashback, and I really like the addition of a tear, showing his last act of defiance against the conversion. Sure, it's a very small act, but there's enough of Picard left in him that he's able to express it in the most minor of ways, and this really is some great visualization. Doctor Who itself did something very similar in the episode Doomsday, where a converted Cyberman actually shed a human tear to show that control had been regained by the person inside it. As always, the Doctor has to be compassionate and pragmatic. After all, what the Cybermen would do to Picard would have been irreversible. Literally nobody has ever come back from that. Well, except maybe Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat. He came back from being a Cyberman, but no one else has quite managed it yet. Also, they weren't real Cybermen and magic was involved, and he's also a cryomancer, so, you know, there's too many variables for me to say whether or not that's worth considering. In truth, I don't know why I brought it up. Guinan also explains further that the Cybermen are almost a universal inevitability, and whole universes have fallen to them. In fact, in the Doctor Who universe, several versions of the Cybermen have been made in other universes and this one, and several creatures that resemble Cybermen have also been made over the course of the show's history. This was touched upon in the unit story Cyber Reality, in which the Cybermen from another universe that they have already conquered found a way to our universe by hijacking VR headsets designed to only glimpse into foreign universes like a window. In fact, these Cybermen were attracted to the Borg and thus came to this universe because of them. A compatible race that they had the advantage over, as they were more or less able to understand concepts like time travel and alternate universes and dimensional hopping, which are things that the Borg either do not know, do not care about, or only know them as theoreticals and hypotheticals at this point in time. Before anyone points out that the Borg have travelled in time and have jumped from universes or whatever else the Borg have done, bear in mind this is set in a very specific point in the Borg's timeline, as is revealed later in the story. The Cybermen were able to convince the Borg quite easily that they had a lot in common and that their technologies and goals were compatible. The Lumic Cybermen from another universe, known as Pete's Verse, attempted a similar alliance with the Daleks in Doomsday, which didn't quite work out as well for those guys.
But consider, our technologies are compatible.
Cybermen plus Daleks.
Together, we could upgrade the universe.
You propose an alliance?
This is correct.
Request denied.
Hostile elements will be deleted.
Exterminate!
Now, the reason why a Cyberman and Borg alliance simply doesn't work is because both parties are designed to take away everything from someone, all of their individuality, and turn them into something else. And the problem with a Cyberman and Borg alliance in this context is one of them will have to give in and give up their identity and be devoured by the other. And I don't think either of them would have been willing to do that. Neither of them would have been willing to take that plunge. They're willing to do it to other people, but when it comes to picking who should get to succeed the other, they are always going to insist that they are the superior form and therefore they should be the form that the alliance takes. There can be no compromise because neither of these two races work on the basis of compromise. Compromise is almost heretical to them as a concept. They just do not do it. So when they come together and actually work together, for a time, yeah, they probably can work together and can borrow from each other, but neither of them is going to let the other devour them and basically work as a strong central unity, because, well, one of them has to dominate the other. As a result, the Cybermen had to do things their own way. Their designs have an element of elegance to them, and their ambition is to achieve a complete and utter uniformity of the entire universe. It is very possible that this could be the inception of the Cybermen in Picard's own universe, and his actions would decide how far they get. And this is something that must be seen to be believed. No amount of description can tell you how far either race is willing to go should they win. By the way, the art at this point in the story really reminds me of courtroom drawings. Then we get to the next page where Rory looks like he's the kind of guy that breaks into people's houses and molests their feet whilst they sleep. It is a somewhat nice scene where Rory talks about his nursing and doctoring job on Earth and how great the Trek tech would be in his own universe, how many lives could be saved. Then Amy and Deanna talk about how much Rory has sacrificed so Amy can go on adventures with the Doctor, and Amy is like, lol, yep. I don't know, I feel like this is a missed opportunity, really. Amy not being in this scene and Rory just being able to talk shop with the ship's doctors would have given Rory a bit more of identity of his own, or a more meaningful reaction from Amy when told, yeah, he really does give up loads in his life just so you can live the life you really want to live, doesn't he? It feels like she's aware of it and doesn't care, rather than I think they were going for she's acknowledging it and shows some form of gratitude, but it doesn't come across that way in its entirety, and I think maybe some more dialogue would have actually improved that, but as it stands, it feels kinda hollow. Anyway, the Doctor shows up and he's like, yep, Picard's a bonehead and won't listen, so Diana suggests that maybe Picard should listen to someone else. They both look at each other and smile, and then turn back to Amy, who they send to seduce Picard. So Amy talks about her experiences with the Doctor to give a bit more of a human perspective on her relationship with him, and thus more human perspective on their side of things in general. Picard is then disappointed to find out that his promised 7 minutes of heaven would have been with Rory instead of Amy Pond. I mean, I'd see that as an upgrade, but I have taste, and we can't all have taste, so, you know. I do like this panel that looks like the Doctor's trying to pick Picard up. Like he's some passing chick on the side of the road that he's sort of trying to convince to get in his car for an impromptu date. In the next panel, the Doctor drank some Pinocchio beer and started turning into a jackass.
What's he think I look like? A jackass?
Anyway, in all seriousness, this is a cool scene in which the Doctor invites Picard aboard his own ship, and Picard is genuinely taken aback by it. It's a brilliant feat of nonsense. One thing that I like here is that the Doctor, whilst giving his usual bit of cheek and whimsy, actually answers his questions about how it's bigger on the inside, and even explains concepts like transdimensional engineering to him. I do appreciate this showing the amount of respect that the Doctor has for Picard in a way that's not over-explained. It's more of an implication than an abundance of dialogue, and it really stands out for people who've seen the way that he's had this conversation with other people beforehand. So the Doctor isn't just showing off his ride to Picard, but is taking him on a Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come style leap in time, so he can see what his current course of action will bring to the galaxy. This is actually very similar as to what he does to Dumbledore. I mean, Kazran Sardik in A Christmas Carol. Totally original story, do not steal. And Sarah Jane Smith in Pyramids of Mars. He also did it very recently in The Devil's Cord, where he takes Ruby to London after it's destroyed because they didn't stop the threat in the 60s. Don't know why she's upset. I'd love a chance to play Fallout London early, but I guess not everyone's easy to please like I am. Here we get a cool glimpse to the cyberized versions of the Star Trek races, though I do kind of find flaw in this from someone who knows enough about the Cybermen to know there's few if any reason that a Cyberman would alter their designs to segregate races. The Converter's previous identity is erased and they all look the same as part of a uniform, as said in Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. Cybermen will remove fear, Cybermen will remove sex and class and colour and creed. You will become identical, you will become like us. Like, I totally get that the artist just wanted to draw Klingons as Cybermen, and that is totally
fish fingers and custard.
Awesome. But the Cybermen wouldn't actually alter the design of the Converted unless there was some sort of physical limitation blocking the regular design. For example, if the brain of the Klingon actually pointed upwards into that horn shape, maybe then the Cybermen would have to adapt to accommodate for it. However, if it's just bone, then they just slice through it and chuck it in the bin, scoop the brain out and dump it in the shell. They don't give a
schlock
who you were before, you're a Cyberman now. There are earlier incarnations of the Cybermen that kept more of the organic components that might have resulted in more variation. But I could never see the Cybermen actually altering their designs based on the creatures they conquer unless it was absolutely necessary. There is an element to the darker side of the Doctor's character here, and this scene kind of touches on it, and that's his willingness to show something like this to someone just to prove a point. He's literally showing Picard everything he's ever known, loved and cared about be destroyed just to say, I'm right about this and you need to listen. Granted, it's for the good cause, that it's to prevent this from happening, but he literally just throws all this at Picard and just expects him to sort of deal with it on the spot. He then chose Raxacoricophalabatorius, the planet of the green three-fingered creatures, most famous of them being the Slovene, who are a family of Raxacoricophalabatorians who are also war criminals. We see them cyberized too. Again, same problem with these guys that I had with the Klingons. I get why, and maybe some sense it could make more sense with these guys given their shape of their heads and their bodies. And maybe their brains can only operate a hand with 3 digits on it, or something akin to that, which would force them to have 3-fingered hands. But, again, I couldn't see there being this much variation in any other line of work. I feel like this is purely fan service, and purely for the sake of the artist, so that he gets a chance to draw the characters this way. And I'm not against that, but I do feel that it's worth mentioning. One thing that is implied here is that the Raxacoricophalabatorians exist in the Trek universe, presumably as well as their planet Raxacoricophalabatorius. I mean, this is a timeline of Picard's future, his universe's future, and he has not gone back to his own universe, or he's not looking back to his old universe, so, as far as I can tell, yes, this is implying that the Raxacoricophalabatorians do exist in the Trek universe. It makes sense to me. I mean, humans exist in both universes, so other races probably cross the Venn diagram too. We also see the Vulcans depicted, who were also conquered in 20 years. We don't see these guys up close, which would have been nice to see, as I would have liked to have seen a Cyberman with elf ears. After this, the Jaduna converted, and we see Cybermen with rhino horns. These guys are apparently used for smashing things, which is fair enough, I guess, but why do you need a strong race to do that? I mean, the Cybermen can literally swap their arms and replace them with a pair of huge guns with jackhammers for hands. They could have built a Jack 5 style Cyberman to just smash the shit out of things and dumped a regular human brain into it. I don't know why you need to convert a race of rhino people in order to deforest planets. You could have even just made robots to do that. Whilst Jaduna are stupid, they are also really good bounty hunters, so again, I'm not sure why they weren't used for that either. Finally, Starfleet Academy falls, as the last best hope of the universe. The Doctor ends by mentioning that the universe is kinda screwed if Picard doesn't buddy up with the Borg, for a wee while at least, and Picard concedes that, yeah, maybe he should. It is quite a strong character moment for Picard, that when he sees his entire universe being destroyed in a window into the future by the Cybermen, he's willing to put any personal animosity he has against the Borg aside and give a temporary alliance with them a chance. We know the damage they've done to him just from this comic alone, and to his people, and to his universe. So this is not an easy thing for him to do, and it is very impressive of his character to be able to do this, because logically it is the best choice going forward. On to issue 6, and the boys are beamed down onto a planetoid which is neutral enough for them both to meet on. Picard isn't willing to budge on meeting the Borg on neutral ground, and he's still going to treat them as if they were the enemy. He's not wrong for doing this, as he knows better than anyone that they aren't above turning on them when it becomes logical or pragmatic to do so. Whilst deception isn't really in their nature according to Riker, the Borg don't really feel obligated to answer to anyone. Once the alliance ends, they will just turn around and shoot the person they were allied with a few seconds ago, unless something of an accord was struck that they wouldn't. There they are. Thanks, Data. Worf proceeds to lock Andor low, to which the Doctor is kinda horrified, and he's told to stop being a baby and shut up and stop simping for the Borg.
Well then, what are we going to do?
Ask her nicely to please stop destroying the universe. Oh my god, we are.
The Borg send down the conduit to make a truce with the Enterprise, a form of Borg ambassador who's designed for this particular mission. He explains that the Cybermen must be destroyed as assimilation won't be possible. Their technologies are a little too compatible with the Cybermen and would likely gobble them up if they tried. Even if they could temporarily assert dominance over the Cybermen's tech, it's very likely that the Cybermen would constantly try to wrestle back control and maybe even have an easier time of it from the inside of the Borg Collective. The Borg do not promise not to turn on them, but they do logically explain that Picard's existence is essential to their continued survival, and therefore he cannot, nor should not come to harm or be processed during their alliance. It kind of reminds me of Osgood in Code Silver, where they need Picard intact in order to use him against their enemy, kind of like bringing Godzilla to fight another big monster for you. It's kind of like the opposite of mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured salvation? I don't know. The conduit offers to go with Picard and offers to be an advisor and diplomat and even disarms himself, quite literally by ripping his arms off until he's completely void of threat to the humans around him and the ship he's entering. He couldn't attack anyone or plug himself into anything if he wanted to. Things are going well until Riker, who's been pretty quiet up until now, suddenly realizes why the conduit looks so familiar. It's Marcus Bartrand, his former friend. Obviously, this kind of sours things, as using the corpse of someone's dead friend as a mouthpiece isn't usually the best way to go about a peace negotiation. The part about this that's really messed up is that Riker assumes that this is some sort of insult, but it's not. The Borg actually made Bertrand the conduit and used him as an ambassador because they thought it would bring the Enterprise crew comfort to see a familiar face. This is the second time where the Borg have really weird and flat-out terrible grasps of human nature, where they attempt gestures of respect and almost gestures of decency, only for it to blow up in their faces as an absolute failure, and it's almost worse than if they hadn't tried at all. I really like this element of the Borg. I'm not too familiar with the extended media or the show, so I'm not sure again how true this is to the show, but this is really good as an aspect for these characters. The Borg have such little understanding of humanity that they do terrible things thinking that they're appeasing them. They're hurting people thinking they're healing them because they're just so clueless. There's most certainly logic in there, but it's missing the context that comes with emotion, which is why the Borg are so bad at it. I do find myself siding with the Borg pretty quickly when they say that meetings and meeting rooms are BS and they can have their stupid little conversation anywhere. I've literally been saying this in the office for like a decade now. He explains that their alliance initially went really well, but neither the Borg or the Cybermen could tolerate the sharing of power. Neither wanted to give up their identity and become the other, and due to the Borg not really being capable of deception, at least not on the Cyberman's level, they were betrayed. The thing that triggered the betrayal was the arrival of the Doctor, who the Cybermen fear a great deal. I mean, he is to the Cybermen and the Daleks what Asterik is to dinosaurs. The Cybermen found a back door into their system and more or less lobotomized the Borg. A lobotomy, if you will. Or even if you won't, I don't care. This stopped the Borg's decision-making capabilities and thus made them defenseless to the Cybermen's attacks. The conduit was activated as a final desperate effort to save the Borg, and they were basically made as a splinter group before the rest were also lobotomized. However, this isn't something they can keep up forever, and time is running out for the Borg as a whole. Which, would really suck for the whole universe if they died out or something. Anyway, the Cybermen have deleted all of the Borg's data libraries, which sucks because they were halfway through Grey's Anatomy and now they'll never see the end. The Doctor, however, has a plan that only he could really do. Just go back in time and copy it and bring it back forward to the present. It's like the ultimate layer of cloud data protection. The only thing he needs is a date and time in which he can go back and steal the Borg's hard drive. They explain that the only one that they can think of is the Battle of Wolf 359. For some reason, this makes him reference Bad Wolf, which I think is more than a bit misaligned. Like, maybe if a Federation ship was called Bad Wolf, that would make sense for him to note it, but the battle was just called Wolf 359. Also, Bad Wolf is a link between Rose and the Doctor, a different incarnation of the Doctor as well, and that has absolutely nothing to do with anything in this entire story. It's a really dumb line, and I can't even call it an observation. He just heard that they lost 11,000 officers to a horrible war, and he's like, huh? Wolves? I had a girlfriend who was a bad wolf once. Hell, it would have just been as relevant and as intelligent for him to pick up on the word 11 and go, huh, I'm my 11th incarnation, isn't that funny? Whilst the Doctor is going down to the wolf battle to go looting, a bit like the War Master in Cyber Reality actually, they decided to go downstairs and introduce their new Borg friend to Geordi so the Borg can tell him how to do his job. I'm sure he'll really appreciate that. The boys also need a supply of gold, so they go to the fish people and ask for some. So when they get there, Lieutenant Goggles shows up and she's asked for a fuck ton of gold. They need to ask the fish people leader since it's kind of his gold, and whilst the fish fellow shows up, the Doctor is possessed by the ghost of Shatner, I think. Anyway, the fishman is a bit concerned because, kind of like America in the 20th century, the planet's entire economy is linked to gold. This is where the Doctor comes in and seals the deal, basically saying that if they do this, it's a gamble, but it would mean that the Federation would owe them their lives going forward, which is, it kind of has a bit of leverage when you bring it up every time after that. He also throws in that the fish people and everyone else in the universe is kind of dead if they don't, so they should probably just stop being big fish babies and just man the hell up and give over their gold. The Doctor then goes on to the Enterprise and begins his mission to throw himself into the heart of the wolf battle. I do kind of like that he gets himself involved in a historical battle within universe. It does bring out the Trek versus rich history that he keeps having these interactions with past events within the universe. It kind of shows how strong it is as a series that you can actually have these time-hopping situations across the whole thing. Picard and Riker would like to go and assist him in this horrible battlefield, but he insists they cannot as they'd be crossing their own timeline, and that would lead to them accidentally or more likely purposely changing events. This is actually a lie, something that Amy brings up to him and holds him to account over. The Doctor admits that he did lie to Picard and Riker, that he could have brought them, and there wouldn't have been an incident within and of itself, although these two possibly could have attempted to run off and try to change history in a way that was less terrible for them. The bigger concern, however, on the Doctor's mind is that no one should really have to live through something like this twice. I feel like there's a subtle point of comparison here for the Time War. In both conflicts, the Doctor and Picard became something they hate against their will out of necessity. The Doctor is as ashamed of the War Doctor as Picard is of Locutus.
They took everything I was. He used me to kill and to destroy, and I couldn't stop them. I should have been able to stop them. I tried. I tried so hard. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't good enough. I should have been able to stop them. I should.
Whilst they aren't exactly the same, they are both a part of themselves that they have to begrudgingly accept as their past, even if it brings them great shame. In comparison, the Doctor himself has had several opportunities to go back into the Time War to pursue something or fix something, and has refused every time, because he can't go back. Picard, on the other hand, was actually willing to throw himself back into Wolf 359, but might not be thinking straight, and it might have just sort of dawned on him the second he arrived, and he might have freaked out. Or he just might have had a longer term reference in his head to the nightmare that he left behind, and it would have been harder for him to move on. Amy and her boys arrive on the ship, only to quickly notice that this is very uninviting. This might be the most unfriendly place to organic life that the Doctor has ever visited, and he's visited Blackpool. Now, one thing I want people to take away from this is that whenever you watch the Trek stuff that covers Wolf 359, always remember that somewhere in that cluster of Borg ships, Matt Smith is down there looting stuff whilst the battle rages.
Resistance is futile. You will disarm your weapons and escort us to Sector 001. If you attempt to intervene, we will destroy you.
Fight does not go well, Enterprise. We're attempting to withdraw and regroup. Rendezvous with fleet.
Take us to the battle coordinates, Mr. Crusher.
The Tolstoy. The Kyushu. The Melbourne.
Like the original Borg stories, the Borg don't really care about Amy and her boys so long as they aren't doing anything hostile or interfering with their ships. I do really like this aspect of the Borg where they just sort of see people like insects and they just sort of ignore them unless they give them a reason to react. However, I can't help but think this might not work so well in this particular context, given that the Federation are currently attacking their ship, or are about to at the very least. I feel like the original reasoning that they'd never come into contact with humans before and had no reason to fear or attack them, and of course the people who arrived the first time were like a scout ship or just passing tourists or whatever they thought they were at the time. But when you're at war with humans, and humans are now just wandering around your ship, like, I don't know, they aren't in uniform or armed, but I find it hard to believe that the Borg would know exactly what humans were Federation and enemies and which ones weren't. And when humans start magically appearing on your ship in the middle of a battle against humans, wouldn't that be a bit suspicious to literally anyone or anything in the universe? It's then that they find Picard back when he was Locutus. Even the Doctor takes a moment for pause. The Doctor explains that Picard here is the same Picard and explains that he knows that Picard broke away from the physical restraints of Locutus, but he'll never be able to separate himself from the memories that it left behind. I'm sure most Trek fans probably already know the impact that being Locutus had on Picard. Whilst the physical scars basically healed, the emotional ones are forever, and it did forever damage his reputation. For example, he constantly met people whose families, friends, colleagues, and whoever else had been killed by Locutus.
It's been a long time, Captain. We met before. Yes, sir. We met in battle. I was on the Saratoga at Wolf 359.
After getting what they need, the battle commences and they stop for a moment to consider what is about to happen. I do like that the Doctor actually remembers the number of the dead. It's an unimportant detail, but due to severity, he carries it with him. Like the children on Gallifrey. It kind of shows that this is who the Doctor was at this time. Because in the 50th anniversary special Day of the Doctor, the War Doctor asks how many children were on Gallifrey the day that he pushed the nuclear button and killed them all. The 11th Doctor doesn't apparently remember. The 10th does, and is enraged that his future self could be so callous as to forget that. And I did always feel that it was open to interpretation, as if he could have forgotten it. Or if this is just sort of his coping mechanism and he's just playing aloof, pretending that it doesn't bother him anymore. This possibly is him before he became that man, or this kind of proves that he didn't forget. He's a kind of complex man, so I think either is possible, but I like to think that he didn't forget, because to me, it just seems a bit out of character to sort of forget something like that. Amy attempts to protest the battle undergoing as they leave, saying that they should stop it. I feel like she's a bit late in the game to try and say something like this. I mean, this battle is too important to the timeline to be stopped, especially given that they are part of events further down the road. She's at this point been travelling with the Doctor long enough to know these kind of rules. Like, why did she think that he's not gone back in time to stop Hitler? I mean, they were in the 1940s and saw how awful World War II was. Why do you think he didn't just go, oh, you know what, I'm going to go stop that Hitler bloke and put a stop to this? Some things just play out historically, they just have to. I think if she was a much newer companion, then it might have made sense, or if it was an Enterprise crew member, maybe someone like Worf, I could understand. But it doesn't make a huge amount of sense for someone who's been travelling in time for this long to not know that you can't really mess around with historical events like this. Besides, anyway, preventing this battle could potentially change things in their current timeline, and the Cybermen could be unstoppable.
Stopping Wolf 359 might have had a knock-on effect that could affect the Federation. But they wouldn't have upgraded to weapons, they wouldn't have upgraded to defences, they wouldn't have built the Starship Defiant. And where would they be defence-wise? Probably getting their asses kicked by the next villain of the week that comes up. Star Trek Deep Space Nine. That's about a pod guy called the Dominion. They probably would have came through the wormhole and kicked the Federation's bum-bums. Prof, can you deactivate nanny filters so I can swear again? Bum. Bum. Bum.
They get back literal seconds after they left, which is a huge middle finger to Amy, who had to wait 10 or more years. Meanwhile, these clowns only had to wait half a sentence. Shows where the Doctor's priorities are. Anyway, despite getting the data back, the Enterprise now has the problem of not being able to catch up with the Cyber Boys, which basically means they've lost and the whole thing was a waste of time. Thankfully, they have a time machine that they can basically use to teleport. The Doctor offers to take a crew forward through space to the Borg Collective, almost in an instance. Picard admits that he hasn't got a better plan and goes along with it, to which the Doctor kind of admits that he wanted it to work out this way the whole time. Riker hangs back to ask if they can save Captain Bertrand, which is sadly up to Bertrand himself to fight the Borg. It is possible to come back, but not everyone manages it.
You know, Bertrand. He's a bit of a mirror of Picard. Supposed to be an ambassador to help facilitate humanity's assimilation. 7 of 9 was an ambassador to the Voyager when they travelled through the Borg space. So Bertrand's arc here is quite accurate to the Borg. The Borg seem to be totally different from Cybermen, in that Borg operate as a collective of one, but still physically retain their original form and have diversity, sacrificing elegance for efficiency and using biological elements to their advantage. To Herosian and Talaxians, they make excellent tactical drones because of their musculature. Vulcans are good processing drones because they're smart, and Ferengi are bogified as well, because I suppose somebody needs to be an accountant that runs their video games industry and brings them in locked boxes, innit?
Worf has, of course, turned the phasers, stasers, and razors into anti-Cyberman weapons. Of course, the Doctor attempts to insist that they shouldn't go in with guns, which I have to admit, this is kind of more on the stupid side of the pacifism scale. I mean, Cybermen and Borg can't really be bargained or reasoned with. The Doctor knows this, and it's not like they are sentient or reasonable. They're basically mechanical zombies. There is literally no reason to not be armed for this mission. Like, on scale, I'd say this is like the Time War. So yeah, taking a gun into that probably isn't the stupidest thing you can do. Anyway, the Doctor quickly learns that you'd sooner be able to convince King Yrcanos to take up knitting rather than convince even the most civilized of Klingons to give up their gun. They're like Americans that way. I do like this panel where Worf and Data first get a look inside the TARDIS.
How can a ship be bigger on the inside than the outside?
To Worf, this is like wizardry that's almost something to be feared, but to Data it's a fascination that he's almost nerding out over. Data is quick to work out the concept of multidimensional engineering being behind the design of the ship. At this point, Amy's boys throw themselves into the heart of the Cyber Armada. They arrive and avoid being detected for all of 8 seconds. Cybermen and cyborgs appear and start shooting, and I do quite appreciate some of the chaos that this segment brings. Anyway, Amy and her boys are on the other side of the ship, and they don't see anything wrong until Rory steps out and starts looking around. I like that Worf collars him like a straying puppy, and then just hands him back to his owner, Amy. Like, watch him! It tickled me, it did. Anyway, these cyborgs have travelled a whole universe just to get their shining armour kicked in by Worf. Trip worth making, I'd say. Worf then hands them phasers and suggests they use them to defend themselves instead of wandering around a war zone full of hostile enemies that will shoot on sight. Completely defenseless as well, might I add. But they've been with the Doctor for some time now, and his pacifistic message has been witnessed and seen in action, especially in episodes like The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, in which the Doctor showed them that violence and weapons can only lead to more violence, and things cannot possibly move forward until, yeah, but if you take a damn gun, you'll be able to defend yourselves. Oh yeah, well screw that noise then. Worf then walks into the next room and pronounces Kiach.
Oi, Handles, what does Kiach mean?
Dainty fecal matter.
Thanks, Handles.
Then in the next panel, Picard also walks into a hall full of cyborgs. It just says, Murd.
Hell's that mean? I don't have French in me data banks. Just Star Trek and argue on forums about Star Trek.
Oh, it means... poopy.
Worf takes control of the situation, because honestly, who else will? Rory? Actually, that would have been pretty sick. He was a Roman soldier, so he's not completely clueless. Especially if he was in his legionary armor, that would have been cool. Sorry, tangent. Worf's plan is sound, minus the fact that there's a real possibility that running around this alien ship, shooting random things, might just blow it up. But he puts that as an acceptable mission parameter. Not that Rory agrees, mind, but at least most of them agree, even if it's mostly out of fear that Worf will beat him up if they don't. I do really like some of the imagery created here with the Cybermen, like these Cybermen obscured by smoke and fog, merely an outline with lights enabled inside. They do a great job striking a silhouette. And I do also appreciate that during battle scenes like this, the comics visuals get quite chaotic. This has happened a few panels before, but this is where it really starts to show up. Deified droppings! This guy gets grabbed, pulled in, and shot in the face at the closest possible range. Meanwhile, Amy's boys are hopelessly lost without Amy and get nabbed by Cybermen, who know exactly what to do with Picard and the Doctor since they are organic, as well as the Borg who are mechanical, but Data is like a whole new thing entirely to them, so they need to bring him into the cyber controller. Although I do find it odd, have they not seen an android before? Because androids exist in pretty much all of sci-fi, and they must have encountered an android before this point. Maybe not one as complex as Data or something along those lines, but I do find it kinda hard to believe that they just don't have a plan for what is essentially a robot. They're given a break when an alert comes from outside. The Enterprise has finally caught up with them. They blasted the ship with a gold-infused particle beam, more or less filling them with gold dust, making it impossible for the Cybermen to breathe. The Doctor considers poaching Geordi for a companion, but Picard tells him to back off, Geordi's his. They then enter the room with the cyber controller in it, who is sat on one of those thrones. He looks very reminiscent of the John Lumic cyber controller from Age of Steel, but he has a Borg eyepiece attached. Whilst the visible brain on him is awesome, I do kinda wonder why they basically exposed the brain of the most important Cyberman on the ship. It is behind some form of glass, and I assume it's the strongest glass they have, like plexiglass, but I always wonder if someone could just shoot it out with a bullet or something. I kind of like the detail of the cyborg controller wringing his hands together, like he's scheming constantly. It's a nice little touch. So, Data and the Borg tackle the cyber controller and hold him in place. They're both mechanical, so their strength equals his and allows him to be pinned down, whilst Picard shoots his guards. The Doctor rips the cyborg controller's chest piece off and hooks up the conduit to it, allowing him to restore the Borg collective. This prompts the conduit to set the Cybermen to self-destruct, to which the Doctor protests that this is genocide, which I don't really get because the Cybermen are like, I mean, I'm not racist, but I think killing them is kind of a kindness to the Cybermen and the entire universe, given that they are people who have had their humanity ripped away from them and they're incapable of anything other than being Cybermen. You can't cure a Cyberman, even a partially converted one. So, yeah, these guys can't come back from this, and they can't do anything other than conquer and destroy. It's what they are now. So killing them is the only option, both for them and literally everybody else they could kill later down the line. The threat that these guys pose is too great to get cold feet about blowing them up now, so yeah, I doubt that the 11th Doctor would have actually protested to them all being blown up. I mean, Rory blew up whole ships of them as a warning shot, as part of a plan cooked up by the Doctor. So he can't be that dedicated to the Cyber Lives Matter cause. They get back to the TARDIS in time, but the conduit plugs himself into the TARDIS. This was an oversight of theirs that the conduit isn't able to assimilate organic things, but managed to slip past something that was able to assimilate inorganic components. Well, if we're being very technical, the TARDIS is, I guess, alive, so I guess that makes it semi-organic? But the console room is definitely mechanical, so that point's kind of moot. Don't know why I brought it up, really. Anyway, the conduit reveals that they are no longer in danger, and he's free to use the Doctor's TARDIS as a means to go back in time and start the Borg even earlier. If the Borg began at the dawn of time and had no resistance, just imagine what they'd achieve by today. I mean, in theory. I don't know how they wouldn't cancel each other out, but apparently it doesn't work like that anymore in fiction, so who the hell knows. I mean, they could always cannibalize the TARDIS like the Master did and wipe out his soldiers' ancestors after that. That worked for him, I guess it could work for these guys. Wait, why am I giving them tips? I should stop. Data attempts to stop the conduit, but is instantly grabbed. The TARDIS, now that it has him stuck in one place, is able to retreat into the nearest mechanical life form that it feels that it can trust, which is Data. The TARDIS basically turns Data into Bad Wolf from The Parting of the Ways, but because Data is a machine, he can handle the TARDIS being inside him without it killing him, unlike Rose. To sum up, the Doctor's wife got inside another man the moment that she saw him, and he got cooked in front of all his friends. They tossed the conduit into the Time Vortex, which I'm pretty sure is against Time Vortex Environmental Act and will probably piss off the CIA, but whatever. The TARDIS ends up leaving Data as soon as the coast is clear, and the two leave quite an impression on each other. Maybe they'll be back for more dalliance later. Riker looks over an old photograph of him playing the trombone with Marcus Bertrand, who I think is playing synth actually. Oh, the tragic irony. It's a shame his Borg self couldn't keep those bitchin' shades. When you compare the conduit's grey, sagging face to that lively smile, you realise just how much was lost. And you can see what it is that Riker mourns. Now, Bertrand isn't a character in real Star Trek from what I can tell, which is a shame. I could see him playing a similar role to Warp Dark Matter in Buzz Lightyear: A Star Command. Man, I remembered that of all things. Whatever. Anyway, sadly, this is his first and last appearance in both franchises. Riker questions how such a stubborn and independent man could be dominated by the Borg so easily, to which Deanna explains that it targets all aspects of your soul and manipulates aspects of your brain. Perhaps him being stubborn, independent and driven is what made him easy to assimilate. Perhaps the Borg were able to use that against him, whisper in his ear to play on his insecurities, grudges and desires. Or perhaps, whilst these traits were strong in him, they just simply weren't enough. Riker finds consolidation in the fact that Bertrand, whether it was him or not, did save the universe from the Cyberman threat, and it is possible that there is enough of him in there to recognise his achievement. Maybe that's why the conduit was so helpful for so long. And maybe inside, Bertrand actually got some satisfaction from seeing his own self save the universe one last time. The Doctor then explains that the events of these comics are literally going to contain themselves. The destruction of the Cybermen will likely have erased all physical traces of them, including the digital memories from the computer's databanks. However, their organic memories will remain. Picard then tells them to get the hell off his ship and sets his phaser to maximum settings. I kid, he's got mixed feelings about their arrival causing so much trouble, even if it wasn't their fault directly, and in the nicest possible way, he hopes to never hear from the Doctor or his universe ever again. Though it was nice to meet the Doctor, Amy, and mostly Rory. The Doctor is able to fly them back to their own universe, even if his face is melting. However, their visit did leave an impression on the Borg, as well as the Enterprise crew, and the Borg now realise that time travel is possible, and they begin to work on their own time travel capabilities. I believe this is setting up the episode Regeneration, the name of which is, well, it's kind of had its implications changed, hasn't it? And that's the end. I do really like this as a crossover comic. I have had one or two problems with one or two minor things, but overall I do love the ambitious scale of this, the inclusion of the characters, the respect given to both franchises as much as possible, and I do very much like the level of thought that has gone into this. It's a very satisfying crossover event, and I do like it a lot. It's kind of a shame that it just sort of fell into obscurity as a comic. I think comics are the medium that get the least amount of eyes put on them, ironically. And I also kind of think as well that it's especially true when a comic gets out of print almost immediately after it's printed and then just ends up being thrown onto the back burner of rights protection forevermore. I really don't understand why companies just don't do the 50-50 thing. Like, it baffles me. It's like, why not just make 50% of the profit instead of no profit at all? Like, it makes no sense. There have been one or two minor other crossover events, but I haven't found any on this scale as of yet. A few minor crossover elements have happened over the years. For example, the 7th Doctor, played by Sylvester McCoy in one of the old comics, had a Star Trek style uniform in one of his wardrobes. In Star Trek Enterprise Season 2 Episode 16, they apparently have some form of junk TARDIS on their ship. In Star Trek The Next Generation's first season finale, The Neutral Zone, they actually had a screen which showed a bunch of stasis patients, and all of them were named after the actors that have played the Doctor up until that point. Not to mention either that very recently, whilst I was actually working on this, the 15th Doctor said this.
Aha! Is that like a matter transporter like in Star Trek?
We gotta visit them one day.
So hopefully it's a omen for an on-screen adaptation of this show. I mean, both shows are up and running right now. There is not a better time to do such a thing.
Well, I guess now that that's completed, it's time for me to go back to my own channel.
Yeah, maybe I could finally be decommissioned instead of being a severed head full of pointless sci-fi trivia.
Yeah, about that, Anduwz. I was kind of going to be doing the EastEnders crossover at some point after this, so I am going to wipe that little noggin of yours and replace all of the Trek stuff with EastEnders.
Throw me in the toilet.
Oh, come here.
You son of a...
Give us any chance, we'll take it. Read us any rule, we'll break it. We're gonna make our dreams come true. Nothing gonna hold us back now. Straight ahead and on the track now. We're gonna make our dreams come true.
Why did you program me to feel pain, you cat?